I'm going to give you 5 tactics of sharing a story. The first we've kind of seen, the data story. It's the one with the timeline, and you unfold it based on the time, and it's pretty straightforward, right? You just describe what happens. The key thing in any data storytelling is you just have to have a little bit of this happened, and you got to get people thinking, I wonder what happens next, right? If they're thinking that, you've got a good story on your hands, right? Of course, you can't make it up with data storytelling. It's got to be what's in the data. But the second type of story is when you sort of go, okay, well, what's the explanation that actually explains the data, right? And you might tell a story that helps explain that insight. So I know I've been doing work with a big food company, right? Global food company. And in Brazil, they have massive docks, and their wheat gets obviously transported to these docks, and they were looking at the data of the volumes, and all of a sudden the volumes just dropped down, and they couldn't work out what was going on. It wasn't a seasonal thing. It took them ages to work out. Eventually, one of the analysts jumped in a car, drove out to the docks, and he discovered that out of the 5 massive machines that poured grain onto these ships, 2 of them were had fallen out of repair, right? They were broken. And the guys at the docks they knew it was a problem, but they didn't see it as a big enough problem. They didn't realize what it would take, what it was causing in terms of the data and the cost and the profits of the company. So for an analyst, if you were that analyst who drove out there and discovered that would be a great story to tell, right? As part of the explanation of the hard numbers that you're showing. That would bring the story to life. It would give you credibility as an analyst. It would be a story people wouldn't forget, right? And that's part of it, right? They got to believe it. They got to remember it. They got to have enough for them to work out what happens next so that they can make a decision. The third tactic, what I call discovery stories. Sometimes you have to tell the story of how you discovered the insight, right? So that's another sort of approach, a little bit like explanation stories, but you're talking about from beginning to end, how did we find the insight? Fourth type is sometimes you need to zoom in. Like, for example, I hear a lot of companies doing employee engagement surveys, and they show their circumplex data and all the percentages, etc., but you still don't get a sense of what's really happening. So sometimes it's good to zoom in, find one story from one employee, right, about how they're experiencing that company, and tell that as an example of a data point that you have in your data. It just, again, brings it to life. And then finally, just like Barry Marshall did, sometimes you have to trigger a story. When people don't believe what you're saying, when it's so different to their background books, the stories in their heads, you might have to do something so remarkable that people actually, like he did, drinking that beaker of that bacteria, it's so remarkable that it will actually get people telling stories about it and change people's minds.